In 2023, I played around 40 games. Some of those are brand new releases from last year, but others are of course from the never-ending backlog. And I just wanted to talk about these games, just quick-fire review style. And as the title or the thumbnail says, in this video I'll only be talking about those backlog games that I played in 2023. If you're interested in my thoughts on the new games though, like Tears of the Kingdom, Final Fantasy 16, Spider-Man 2, and all of that stuff, I have another video on my channel up already, and it'll also be in the description. And if you're somehow interested in more of my stuff, why not subscribe and leave a like? I really appreciate all of the support, as it does really help me out. Oh, by the way, there also won't be any spoilers at all. Some of these games might be quite old, but I kinda want this video to introduce some of these games to new players. And to do that, of course, I don't want to go around spoiling them. But let's get into it now. As you can see, I do have quite a few games here, and these aren't even all of them, as some of them are digital only. But we're gonna start off now, and we're actually gonna start off with a game that I only have digitally. Final Fantasy I, the Pixel Remaster. And I actually had a lot more fun with this game than I expected. Of course, it is just a basic and short JRPG with a lot of grinding and minimal story, but what was there was just a lot of fun. The combat had some challenge to it, but not too much, and while it was simple, it wasn't boring either. And even if I say minimal story, there definitely was a story, and towards the end it even surprised me with some of the elements that it was tackling, even if it was still kept relatively simple. It was just really cool to see something like this in such an old game. It was also just really interesting to see where this massive franchise started and how some of my favorite aspects of Final Fantasy were present since the very beginning already. That element being the general progression of your adventure. You start off going somewhere on foot, not knowing where to go in these strange lands, fighting your way through the overworld and the dungeon of the mainland, and later on you unlock a ship, a boat, giving you access to more lands as you're slowly growing familiar with this world. And in the endgame you have your airship, which you can fly wherever you want, avoiding battles and getting everywhere really quickly, since by this point in the game you also just know this world and the layout. It's a very satisfying feeling of progression, and it's cool to see that something that I personally really loved in the later games such as Final Fantasy VII, that something like that is already here in the very first entry. So yeah, I'm glad that I played this game, and this remaster is a great way to experience it. And just because I really enjoyed it, I didn't stop there either, and I'm planning on playing through all of the Pixel remasters, slowly but surely. And I say slowly because while Final Fantasy I, the Pixel Remaster, was the first game that I beat in 2023, I only played one other Pixel Remaster, that being Final Fantasy II. And while I still enjoyed this game, it's definitely not as good as the first one, even if I did enjoy the story. It's still nothing too special or too in-depth, but it was a lot more present throughout. In the plot of Final Fantasy II, you're part of a rebellion that's at war with the Empire, and I really liked how this war would visually affect the world. Stuff like towns being destroyed as you progress the story was just a cool way to have the plot feel more impactful, even if from a gameplay perspective, these towns would still function the exact same. Character-wise, there were also actual character arcs this time, which is nice, while in Final Fantasy I it was really just the Warriors of Light and you could name them whatever. Here they're actually characters, with Firion, Maria, and the best character of them all, Guy. But that's it for the positives though, as the combat and the gameplay is just absolutely fucked. The leveling system works in the way of whatever you use grows stronger. Do you want to be a mage? Just spam magic, because for every bit of magic damage you do, you level up your magic. And while that system is interesting as a concept, it just doesn't really work and makes you extremely overpowered, even when mainlining the story. You can literally auto-battle every single fight in this game and not die. It also doesn't help that for some reason they upped the rate at which you get random encounters, making them pop up at literally every 2 steps or so. So your characters level extremely fast, making the whole game kind of a mind-numbing experience. It also doesn't really work, as the game likes to switch up your 4th party member pretty often. You always have your 3 main characters, which I named earlier, but for story reasons the 4th slot changes pretty regularly. And while that's a really cool concept, it really fucks with the balancing, since that 4th member will always be underpowered. But since the other 3 are so extremely overpowered, I guess it does kinda balance out, since you can literally just steamroll the whole game. Besides that, the progression of the world, which was my favorite part of Final Fantasy 1, was okay here, but it was kind of missing the sense of adventure that the first game had. I can't put my finger on why exactly, but a big part of it is just the way that you traverse this world. Because the way that you traverse this world is by talking to Cid before every single mission. He's just sitting in one single town, so you basically just go there, he flies you to where you need to be, and then you can walk back to the home base again. So you're not really exploring this world, you're not really going from kingdom to kingdom. You're just in your starting area, you go to Cid, he takes you somewhere, and you go back to the starting area, and you repeat that progress over and over again. So, in the end, while it was definitely a downgrade gameplay and system-wise, I can appreciate what they did with the story, so I am still happy that I played it, even if it does have a lot more flaws than the original. And next up we have the first physical game on the list, Resident Evil 5. Even if I didn't play this version of the game. You can play Resident Evil 5 in co-op, so I played it with a friend, Juno Spite, who I have a podcast with that you should check out, but he only plays on PC, so while I had the game physically for PS4, I ended up getting it on Steam on a sale and playing through it with him. That's kind of besides the point. Let's talk about Resident Evil 5, and this was kind of a questionable entry in the franchise. But the fact that you can play it in co-op did make up for a lot of its flaws, as playing with friends is always just a good time. The game itself also isn't necessarily bad, it's just very mediocre, I guess. Most of the time the fun did just come from playing it together. The gameplay is really wonky and janky, and a lot of the boss fights or quick time events are really tedious and pretty annoying as well. But thankfully that's only for those sections, as the normal levels are pretty alright. Story-wise, there isn't really anything here though. Even the main characters like Chris and Sheva aren't really anything, and it's all just really generic. The best parts of this game for me come from Resident Evil's overarching plotline, with Jill, Chris, and of course Wesker. Wesker probably being the best part of this, as he's just really overdramatic, which makes the whole game pretty entertaining whenever he shows up. But I feel like that's kinda it. I don't have too much to say about this game, as I just think that it was pretty messy, kinda disappointing, and just very mediocre, which is especially disappointing after Resident Evil 4, because Resident Evil 4, the original, made me think that a more action-focused Resident Evil game could actually work, but playing Resident Evil 5 kinda just made me scared for 6. And because I was scared for 6, I haven't actually played 6 yet. Instead, I went back to an older entry in the franchise, a fan favorite, being Code Veronica X. And I'm glad to say that this game didn't disappoint. It's not my favorite Resident Evil game or anything like that, but I definitely did really enjoy it. Especially because it was back to that classic Resident Evil gameplay loop. You only have a handful of locations, but all of them are super in-depth and you learn to master all of them. You're always looking for ammo, and even if you're backtracking a lot, you're always making progress. I do have some gripes with it though, like if you're not using a guide, it is quite easy to get locked out of progressing the game, and if that happens, your only option really is to reload another save file. The way that this happens is just because you need to have very specific items at very specific points in the game, and if you don't know about that, you might be locked out of progress, which is a pretty major issue, and I'm aware of that. But if you know about it, if you have someone tell you about it, or if you follow a guide for those sections, it is pretty easy to avoid. And that's also basically my only major issue that I have with this game, gameplay wise. And because of that, I would say that it's definitely still worth playing. There is a lot of variety in both weapons and enemies, and the switching between the two main characters, Chris and Claire, is done really well. I even prefer how you switch between the characters here compared to how other Resident Evil games handle it, since you don't have to play through the whole game twice with a different character. So once you can get over the controls, because they definitely didn't age the best, this is a very enjoyable game, especially if you're interested in the overarching Resident Evil plot. The game does a fantastic job at tying up plot lines from Resident Evil 1 and 2, with Chris, Claire and Wesker all being here and playing a major role. It was also great to finally have Chris and Claire together for a game, while also having Chris interact with Wesker after the events of 1, adding some more weight to their fights in Resident Evil 5. So all in all, while it's definitely a product of its time, I would really recommend playing this game, and I really hope that Capcom decides to remake Code Veronica next instead of Resident Evil 5, because Code Veronica feels like a mainline game that is crucial to be played somewhere after 2 and somewhere before 5. So if they just remake 5 next, that would be pretty disappointing, as Code Veronica makes 5 a better game, honestly. And next up, we have another physical game, Strangers of Paradise. Final Fantasy Origin. You know, the Killing Chaos game. And as I mentioned in my New Games of 2023 video, this is where I started my Team Ninja Souls game journey, where I played through all of the Team Ninja Souls games with 2 friends in co-op, and we actually really enjoyed the base game here. It sort of frames itself like a retelling of Final Fantasy 1 until the later half, where it's revealed that it's actually something completely different, but I won't spoil that twist. But because of that, the story was pretty fun. It's not really a great story in the way of it being well written. It's kinda just nonsense, but it's definitely fun and entertaining, especially when playing through with friends, because you can kind of just have a laugh with it. And the same goes for the gameplay. It's nothing too incredible or too standout, but it's just some good fun. The main draw of the combat here is definitely the job system. You can equip 2 jobs at the same time and freely switch between them, which then also completely changes the gameplay style. And you can basically be anything, from a brawler to a berserker or a white mage or a blue mage. And this system works perfectly for a game like this. Again, especially in co-op, as one of us would always run a white mage build to heal, one of us would be a gambler and enable random buffs, and another one of us would focus on dealing magic damage. But because you can equip multiple jobs, you're not tied down to being a healer either, as you can just play a DPS and switch to the healing class when necessary. The stages themselves are also pretty fun, even if it does kinda feel like PS3 level design, but every single dungeon and a lot of the bosses are actually inspired by a mainline Final Fantasy game, which is a nice touch. You don't feel like you're missing out if you didn't play a certain Final Fantasy game, but at the same time it is really nice to enter a dungeon from a game that you know. So yeah, I really enjoyed my time with this. Me and my friends all had just a good time with it, and because we enjoyed this game so much, we also played through the DLC. And that was a fucking mistake. And that's for many reasons, but the main one is probably that the DLC is just one massive grind that didn't add too much content, which is partly because of the way that the difficulty is handled. For the main game, despite it being a Souls-like, you have difficulty options. You know, easy difficulty, action difficulty, or normal difficulty, and hard mode. And if you beat the game, you unlock Chaos difficulty for a New Game Plus run. But here's the thing, every single DLC adds a difficulty level that's harder than the one before, and you're forced to play the DLC on that level. For the first DLC, it was Bahamut difficulty, which is then harder than Chaos difficulty. For DLC 2, you had to play on Gilgamesh difficulty, and for the final DLC, they added Lufenian difficulty. So every DLC was already extremely hard from the get-go. And as I mentioned before, the DLCs also don't really add that much content, which doesn't really make it worth the price, but I'll go in order for that. The first DLC, the Bahamut DLC, only adds one single boss. You guessed it, it's Bahamut. But the thing is that, on top of you being forced to play on Bahamut difficulty, he is also a very, very high level. A lot higher level than you would be after finishing the base game. So what the game basically wants you to do is to change your difficulty to Bahamut difficulty and replay the whole game, just to power level your character, and then you can beat him. And that's it. That's the DLC. And then you have DLC 2, the Gilgamesh DLC, which again does add a single new boss, the Gilgamesh boss, But this also adds something called the Rift, which is basically a tower mode. You basically just start off in this tower at the first floor. Then you have a few rifts in front of you, each of them containing a different challenge. Some of these can be fighting a boss from the main game, or you would be fighting a horde of enemies, or you would be teleported to a main game dungeon in which they placed like 20 chests and you need to find the right one. And every time you succeed a level, you basically just go up to the next floor, and after every few floors you fight Gilgamesh. But if you fail a challenge, you go back to the very beginning. And that's it for this mode. It's better than DLC 1, as you're not just replaying the base game over and over again, and the Gilgamesh boss is also very good, but again, it's just recycled content, and it kinda just felt like an endless grind that was only there to make you fight Gilgamesh over and over again. And the third DLC is then the one that actually adds a new stage and another new boss, which is nice, but since every single DLC was harder than the previous one, at this point we just reached the point where the difficulty wasn't a fun challenge anymore, but it was more like torture, as we were struggling to find a working strategy that worked for that final boss fight. So all in all, while the DLCs do add cool new jobs, it was not worth it. It was ball-crushingly hard, and there was barely any new content, and while we all enjoyed the base game, we just wanted the DLC to end since we did not have fun at all. And as any sane person would do, instead of moving on with our lives, we played another Team Ninja game, Nioh 2. We did take a break between them though, and one of the two friends who we played Strangers of Paradise with refused to ever touch another Team Ninja game. But luckily we did find another comrade who did stick around for both Nioh 2 and Wo Long Fallen Dynasty, which I talk about in my other video. But to talk about Nioh 2 now, just like the base game of Strangers of Paradise, it was pretty fun. There was a lot of weapon and combo variety, and you could once again make your builds the way you wanted it to be, even if it wasn't as in-depth as the job system of Stranger of Paradise. You also had the yokai system, which enables you to both summon yokais for special attacks, but you could also turn into one for a short amount of time, which was cool and fun, but it did mess with the balancing a little bit. As a Souls game, it was of course also pretty challenging, but the difficulty here mostly just came from the amount of enemies, which I wasn't really a fan of, since it felt like artificial difficulty, if you get what I mean. I also wasn't really a fan of the story. For some reason there were massive time jumps in between every mission of literal years, which makes it kinda confusing, and a lot of it again just felt like nonsense. And because of that I also didn't really care for most of what was going on, but there was one single memorable character in there, being Tokichiro, or a monkey, who made for some fun moments. But that's it, I think. I don't know, this game was just kinda whatever. I enjoyed playing through it with friends, but again, I didn't like it as much as Stranger of Paradise, and I also don't really think I would have enjoyed this game if I was playing through it alone. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on this whole experience, we also talked about it on the most recent episode of the Jamcast, which should come out very soon after I upload this video, because my co-host of the Jamcast, Mac, is the person with whom I played the Team Ninja games, and we also got Sammy on for a little section, who I played Nioh 2 and Wo Long with. So if you kind of just want to hear us rant about our experience a bit more in depth, and if you want to hear their point of views, check out the podcast, I'll leave it in the description whenever I upload it. And next up, we have another physical game. Finally, Tales of Arise. I'm not going to talk about this game too much, as I literally have a hour-long, spoiler-free, post-platinum review on this game on my channel already, and I did not change my mind on anything that I said, basically. To give my quick thoughts on it though, just for completionist's sake, I absolutely adore this game. The story started off a little bit generic, but the characters were very intriguing from the start, which did take my interest, and as the story picked up speed, I was completely hooked on it. Same thing with the combat, I definitely had to get used to it at first, but once it clicked, it really clicked, and it turned into one of the most fun I've ever had in an action RPG. So yeah, I really adore this game. If you haven't played it yet, I do recommend it, and if you want more of my spoiler-free thoughts, I have a video out on it, which I will leave in the description. And next up we have Splatoon 2, a game that I actually talked about in last year's backlog video, but this year I played the Octo expansion, which I honestly enjoyed a little bit more than the base game, surprisingly enough. I just like the structure of this game more with the metro system, and that you can basically choose how long the game will take you. Since every level is also a bit more of a challenge level, that structure also works really nicely as you can choose which type of challenge you want to go for next, which is especially nice as the game is also really challenging. Most of the time it's the fun type of challenging, but other levels are just kind of hard in an annoying way, and then being able to skip those annoying levels and take a different route to progress the story was really nice, and it made it so that the hard levels didn't really ruin my enjoyment of the game. I also really like the story stuff here. It was a little bit strange that the main idols of Splatoon 2 barely appeared in the main game, but at least in this DLC, they did get their focus, and I'm glad that we finally got to see more of Pearl and Marina, as they're really cool. So all in all, I did just have a good time with Splatoon 2, and I'm sure that I'll play the Story of Tree somewhere in 2024. And next up we have Stray, the cat game. A game that I really enjoyed, but I also don't have that much to say about it since it is kind of a shorter experience, but it was very fun, very relaxing, and also extremely immersive. There's not a lot going on gameplay-wise. It's a really simple game as you're just walking through this world, exploring it, climbing on stuff, interacting with the environment. Sometimes you do sneak around or you're running away from creatures in surprisingly tense moments, but it didn't have to be more than that. You were just exploring this world, trying to figure out the story behind it all, and it was always fun to explore these areas, especially since every single chapter felt very different from each other. The game is also just really gorgeous, and I don't know, it was just really relaxing and immersive to explore this world, to explore the bigger areas, finding all the secrets and looking at the unique interactions you could find. I'm pretty sure that's all I have to say though. It's just a really nice experience, and I highly recommend it. If you just have a day that you have nothing to do or a weekend, you can kinda just relax, get immersed in this game and play through it, as it is really short and just a good time. And next up we have Kirby and the Forgotten Lands, my first ever Kirby game. And again, it was just a really fun experience. It's another game that I don't have too much to say about. It was just a cute and fun experience that also had some very nice variety in the gameplay with both very different feeling levels and abilities. It was really easy though, but it is a Kirby game, so I was kinda just playing through it to vibe, have fun and chill a bit. The final boss went really fucking hard though, not in the way of difficulty, but visual and spectacle wise. I was really surprised. That entire segment was just awesome, but I feel like that was kind of it already for this game. I don't know, it's a good time, it's a fun time, it's very cute, very enjoyable, and I just don't really have anything negative to say about it. It was a lot of fun all the way through. And next up we have One Piece Pirate Warriors 3, and this is yet another game that I don't have too much to say about. We've kind of been having a few of those back to back recently. All of these games are just kind of smaller experiences that I played in between the big releases of 2023, which is why I'm going through these a bit quicker. That's not to say that I didn't enjoy them though. In the case of Pirate Warriors 3, I'm usually not the biggest fan of warrior games. They're always a fun time, but they're not like the peak of gaming, so to say. But every now and then, basically once a year or so, I'd say, I do have this itch to pick up one of these games and play through them. And in 2023, that happened to be Pirate Warriors 3. And I kind of feel like One Piece is the perfect series for this type of game, which is probably why there were 4 of them thinking about it. But just the way that One Piece is structured, with all of the sagas and arcs taking place on different islands, the Straw Hats fighting in a lot of big battles like Enies Lobby or Marineford or Dressrosa, and all of the characters having crazy fighting styles, from Zoro using 3 swords to Sanji kicking people, Usopp being a sniper, Nami using weather magic, and of course all of the Devil Fruit and Haki abilities. All of this just makes for a great warrior game with diverse playstyles and location. Of course it is still a warrior game, so it's nothing too special, but it's just a fun time with some cool retellings of the story, some fun interactions between characters, and as I said, just some fun gameplay with a lot of diverse characters. And I guess that's basically all I have to say about that game. And next up we have another game that I sadly don't have physically. I would love to own it physically though. Drakengard 1. A game that is both really fucking good, but also pretty bad. For those who don't know Drakengard 1, this is an old PS2 game made by the creators of Nier. It's even set in the same universe, kind of, but it is really hard to talk about this game since, looking back at it, I do strangely love it. But playing through it was not really fun, as the game is mind-numbingly repetitive and the combat is just not good at all. But the story is just so insane that I'm glad that I experienced it myself. Everything about this game, besides for the gameplay, is just so strange, but it's also strangely good. It is a little bit hard to talk about this game for a short section like this, but I do have a video on it on my channel, so if you want to hear me talk a bit more in depth about the insanity that is Drakengard 1, I do recommend you check it out. It is just a very, very strange game that, again, I strangely love. And because of that, I'm 100% playing Drakengard 3 sometime in 2024. But I feel like that's basically all I can say about this game in a video like this. It's incredible, but it's also pretty bad. So, to move on from Drakengard, we have another series that I don't own physically. I'm pretty sure that there's not even a physical copy out there. It's a game franchise that I kind of started to play through as a joke. Five Nights at Freddy's. If you're around the same age as me, you probably remember the time where these games first came out and everyone was talking about it. Everyone was watching game theories on it, everyone was watching the Markiplier or Jacksepticeye Let's Plays, and I was no exception to that. But I never actually played the games myself, so with the movie coming out in 2023, it was just weirdly nostalgic for me, which made me feel like checking out the games themselves as a joke when I was in a Discord call with some friends. And for some reason, I actually really enjoyed the first game, which made me check out 2 and 3 as well. Because for such an extremely simple concept, it is surprisingly entertaining, and there's also a surprising amount of strategy needed to clear the more difficult nights. The jump scares definitely stop working after the first few nights, but the challenge and the atmosphere keeps it tense and fun. But while playing the second game, I especially appreciated how simple the first game is. In 1, you only have 4 animatronics. Once you learn how they work, you really feel in control of the situation, and when you die, it rarely feels like RNG. It's because you fucked up and you just did something wrong. Which is then something that I disliked about the second game, as here you have 11 animatronics, which definitely makes it more challenging. But you also have a lot more bullshit deaths, as RNG can kind of just fuck you up with sending a lot of different animatronics at you at the same time, and in that case, there's rarely something you can do about it. And while it is kind of bullshit at times, it is still fun to try and keep the situation under control, especially once you do figure out how every single animatronic works. Which then brings me to the last one that I played, and also my least favorite one, FNAF 3. Gameplay wise, it's not really challenging as there's only one animatronic, and somehow I could beat the game without knowing how Springtrap works. Which would be impossible for 1 and 2, because in those games I really had to learn how each and every animatronic worked. Here I just kinda stumbled through it and somehow I made it through the end. But I don't know, in general this game was definitely the most disappointing one so far, but I'll probably play the other games as well. I honestly don't know why I'm enjoying these games, I don't know why I'm doing this, playing through all of them, I'm gonna be completely honest here, but I started this, I'm strangely enjoying it, so I guess I'll continue this. Which then brings me to the next game. The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. The 3DS remake. And I don't know why, but I don't have too much to say about this game. It's a game that's often regarded as one of the best games ever made, and while I did enjoy it and while I had a good time with it, that's kinda it for me. Most of the dungeons were fun, I enjoyed solving the puzzles, I really liked the story as well, even if it definitely wasn't the main focus of the game. What was here was really cool, and there were some fantastic moments in the story here. Gameplay wise, it didn't age the best in my opinion. I would love to see another remake or remaster of this game that kind of cleans up the gameplay a bit, because that's probably the thing holding it back the most for me. It was far from unplayable, but it was kind of awkward at times. But all that being said, the game is still really charming, and I can't exactly describe why, but it does just have this special and charming vibe to it. Maybe it's the magical music, maybe it's the characters, maybe it's the story or the world, maybe it's a bit of everything, but this game is extremely charming, and ultimately, while I can't exactly put my finger on what it is about it, I ended up really enjoying it, and I can see why it's such a beloved game for many, even if for me, it was just a game that I really enjoyed and nothing more. I will definitely play more Zelda games though in the future from the pre-Breath of the Wild era, because right now I literally only played Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, and now Ocarina of Time. And next up, we have a game that's likely the worst game that I've ever played. Final Fantasy VII Dirge of Cerberus. This game is a third-person shooter game released on the PS3, and it is a sequel to one of my favorite games of all time. It's a game in my top 5. It's a game that means so much to me, Final Fantasy VII. And that's probably why I give this game more shits than it maybe deserves. Dirge of Cerberus is just kind of a nothing game. Gameplay-wise, it didn't age very well at all. It's not unplayable, but it is extremely janky and it's just not fun and extremely repetitive. Story-wise, it was also just kind of nothing. You play as Vincent Valentine, which is an awesome character, but this game doesn't really do anything with him. It tries to show more of his backstory, but most of it is just rehashing stuff that we already knew with Lucrezia, and it just doesn't do anything new or interesting. Outside of these flashbacks, the story is also just really dumb. It's about this organization, Deepground, that's just the most generic evil group that you can imagine. Their goal is to destroy the world, and you're the one stopping them. They could have made them more interesting, but they just didn't, which is an issue with a lot of the Final Fantasy VII compilation. I don't know, man. I knew the gameplay was gonna be bad, so I went into this for the story, especially after they put the Deepground characters in Final Fantasy VII Remake Intermission, but this game just doesn't do anything interesting. In the first half, it doesn't even try, and while the second half is better, and there is that plot twist near the end, which I guess does show that they were trying, it was just kind of shit, to be honest. It's not aggressively bad or anything, it's not funny bad, it's just really uninspired and boring bad, which you could argue is worse. If I had to say something positive about this game, it would probably be that the game is stylish. It definitely has an art style and a visual direction. Vincent is still a cool character. The CGI cutscenes are probably the best part of the game, as they do look really, really cool, and there are some cool scenes of the entire Final Fantasy VII gang in action, but I think that's it. I just don't like this game, and it's sad because, again, Final Fantasy VII means so much to me, but for some reason, the compilation just has stuff like this. It adds characters that were unnecessary, it adds lore that was unnecessary, and while they can do that if they make the characters and the lore interesting, they just fail to do that, and it makes me wonder why. Oh, one thing that I did like, I guess, the post-credit scene was one of the funniest things that I've ever seen, and finishing this game in Discord with some friends was really, really funny, even if the game definitely did not intend it to be funny. But yeah, let's just move on and talk about a good game again. Batman Arkham Origins. I played the Arkham trilogy back in 2015 or something, around the time that Arkham Knight came out, but for some reason, I never played Origins. Until this year, around Christmas time, I finally played it, and I really, really liked it. It might be my least favorite Arkham game though, but not by much, and that also doesn't say a lot since I do adore both Arkham Asylum and Arkham City. I'd say it's probably tied with Arkham Knight, actually. A game that, despite its flaws, I do really enjoy. But this game is, of course, Batman Arkham Origins, so they do show the origin of a lot of elements from the Arkham games. They don't really show Batman's origin, but they didn't have to. Instead, they choose to focus on stuff like his relationship with Gordon, Alfred, and the Joker, which I really liked. The game starts off focusing on the Black Mask mystery, which was handled really well. I did get spoiled on the twist, but even if you get spoiled on it, the game was still worth playing and it was still fun fun to play through this arc of the game. The later arc with the Joker was also really interesting. Seeing his first encounter with the Batman was really cool, and I really like how it was handled in general, as Batman didn't really know how to deal with someone like him yet, forcing him to work together with Gordon for the first time. And Batman's relationship with the Joker and with Gordon were some of my favorite things from the Arkham games, so it was really cool to see the origin of that. Gameplay-wise, the game was also a lot of fun, to nobody's surprise. It's the free-flow combat system, one that never fails to feel satisfying and fun. If I had to give a negative to the gameplay though, it would probably be that the traversal felt a bit slow, but not to the point that it bothered me. It might just be that I'm used to the more snappier and faster and more modern movement of Arkham Knight, so going back to the PS3 era of the Arkham games felt a bit strange at first, but it definitely wasn't bad and it was still enjoyable. And now we reached the final game that I'm gonna be talking about in this video. I have one last game lying right here in front of me. It's Xenoblade Chronicles 2. And the reason I'm giving it this build-up is because I definitely have a history with the Xenoblade franchise on my channel, because I was extremely disappointed by the first game. It had some elements that I enjoyed, but I just didn't like it that much. And ever since, I made the decision to not only play the entire franchise, but also review all of the games in depth. Because, you know, why wouldn't you want to play every single entry of a JRPG franchise after disliking the first one? And you know what? I'm glad that I made that decision, because while the first one isn't even in my top 100 games of all time, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 somehow made it in my top 10. I have yet to play the DLC expansion of Torna, but just looking at the base game, I absolutely adored this game. My video on the first game is already out there, don't get scared off by the thumbnail. The comment section is actually extremely supportive. All of the comments were a lot nicer than I expected, and I do want to say thank you for that. Later in 2024, I'll also have a full review of Xenoblade 2 plus Torna, but for now, let's get into my quick thoughts. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is just a game that I loved more than I could have ever imagined. They basically fixed every single criticism that I had of the first game, while also improving on other things and just telling a great fucking story. The game maybe didn't hook me from the very beginning, as it did have a slower start, but in my opinion it used that slower start to the fullest, by building up on all the mysteries and also building up our characters, making it so that I genuinely adore the whole main cast from very early on. From Rex to Nia, Pyra, Mithra, even Tora and Poppy, I genuinely love all of them. And they all get their focus. All of them go through an arc, be it in the way of having their designated chapter, or to have their development slowly but surely happening over the course of the main game, spread out over multiple chapters. The game handled its characters extremely well. The main story as well, it starts off simple, as I said, but it slowly becomes so much more, as the mysteries of this world and the characters start to unravel in a way that's honestly masterfully done. It constantly had me theorizing about the possible connections and motivations of the antagonists, or about what certain characters were up to. Some of them would end up joining the party, others would end up becoming antagonists, and others would prove their worth only to then get killed off. Also, just going into this game completely blind after playing the first game did have me intrigued from the very first seconds that the game started. At first, one of my main driving forces to play the game was my curiosity to find out just how this game would end up connecting to the first one. But over time, as the story of this game kicked off, and as I got attached to these characters, that kind of became an afterthought for me, since I was just so incredibly invested in what was going on in this game, in this experience. Only for the end to then come around and connect this experience to the first game in an extremely unexpected, but also really satisfying way. Gameplay-wise as well, the game just had a really fun combat system, even if it was extremely confusing at first. The game did just do a horrible job at explaining it, which is definitely a flaw, don't get me wrong, but it is how it is. I watched some guide videos, and similarly to what I said about Tales of Rise, once it clicked, and it was extremely satisfying to chain together blade and driver combos, to build up the elemental cores and to then finish off an enemy in a team-up attack. It's not my favorite combat system that I've ever seen or anything like that, but it was really fun, really satisfying and very in-depth, which I did like. Which I guess brings me to the blade system and the gacha elements. Which, yeah, the game would probably be better without the gacha, but I honestly didn't really mind it, as the game does throw core crystals at you constantly, which you can then use to constantly summon new characters, so you constantly get new weapons, which kept the combat fresh. It was really overwhelming at first though, but finding a setup of blades and drivers that worked was a lot of fun. The affinity system is something else that gets criticized a lot, but again, personally, I didn't mind it too much. As many things in this game, it was a little bit overwhelming at first, but once I understood how it worked, I kinda just kept it in mind as I was progressing through the game, so I didn't run into any problems with it. That being said though, the criticisms that I have heard of it are pretty valid. While I personally didn't mind it and while I didn't run into problems with it, it definitely could have been handled better, as right now it is very in your face and you're kind of forced to engage with it, even if you might not want to. But that's genuinely my biggest criticism of the game. As I said, for me personally, these criticisms are criticisms, but they never really bothered me, they never really ruined my experience, as I personally never ran into problems with them. It could have been done better, yes, but it wasn't ruining my enjoyment at all. Which is why I did just really love this game. But that's it for now. I did beat the game really recently, it was literally a few days ago. So maybe over time, as I sit on it, as I rewatch the story to make my video, I might change my mind on some very small things, but we'll see about that when I do eventually make the Xenoblade 2 video later this year. For now though, phenomenal game. Absolutely loved it. Never thought I'd be a fucking Xenoblade fan. But that was it for all of the backlog games that I played in 2023. Unexpectedly, Xenoblade 2 did become my favorite game of 2023, and I'm super excited to play both Torna and Xenoblade 3 in 2024. Besides that, I don't really know what I'm gonna be playing in 2024 backlog-wise. I have a lot of games that I want to get to. As I said, the backlog is never ending, but we'll see which ones I play in my backlog video of next year. But yeah, that's it for me. If you're interested in the games that I played in 2023, that also released in 2023, that video will be one of the end cards on screen right now and in the description. Subscribe if you want more videos like this, leave a like and let me know what you thought of these games. Let me know what your favorite game is that you played in 2023, regardless of when it came out. But I'm gonna leave it here. Thanks again for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and hopefully I'll see you all again soon.